Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Fisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the impacts of Russia-Ukraine war. There are so many sectors. Let's start off from the energy sector. Look at the oil prices at the moment. Look at the shortage. We are all suffering. Major supplier of oil, obviously Russia is one of those. Sanctions imposed on Russia and they could not do trade with the European Union. A lot of European Union countries do believe that they need to continue their trading relationship with the Russians, but American pressure is obviously there. You talk about the impact on the food prices. Definitely, when we talk that Ukraine and Russia produce about 30% of the global wheat, that is a lot of wheat we are talking about. And Pakistan has also become one of the wheat importing countries. Now, having said that, let's suppose Pakistan imports 3 million tons of wheat. That is what our shortage is. But having said that, now 22.2 million tons of wheat is still stored inside the godowns of Ukraine. And this year, they could not do the harvest. So you can well imagine they cannot export, A. And secondly, there is no wheat available for the next season now. So you can well imagine the kind of shortage we are talking about. You talk about maize, you talk about barley, you talk about cooking oil, especially from the sunflower. Ukraine is one of the major producers. So now, having said that, there is going to be a lot of impact on all this. And this is going to create an impact on the global milk prices. And everything is going to get interlinked. Transportation cost has gone up. And the war, which we all thought will be over in a matter of weeks, is still continuing. A lot of support is being given by the European Union and the Americans to the Ukrainians against Russians. But having said that, now it's lingering on. Casualties are taking place on both sides. A lot of new anti-tank missiles have been given to them. A lot of support from the West is very much there for Ukraine, and they are fighting. It's more or less like Afghanistan kind of a situation to me. The only difference is that Ukrainians are white Christians mostly who are fighting against the Russians. Over here, they were brown Muslims. Now, in order to engage Russia, interestingly, everybody thought that their economy is going to collapse. But if you look at ruble, currently it's trading at around 57 rubles for a dollar. That used to be around 88 prior to the war. So less demand for the export, less dollar requirement has led to this. Plus, a lot of dollars are with them, and perhaps that is the major area. It's around $650 billion. I'm talking about the reserves of the Russians. So still, there's a long way. They will never give up on Ukraine. They have taken over all the major cities now, most of them. But obviously, when you talk about the fight that is still going on, it's kind of a guerrilla warfare. But let's see what happens and where it leads. But according to the global analysts, the financial ones I'm talking about here, they believe that the global recession is very much there. So most of these countries, they have reset their growth targets. Even countries like Pakistan, the third world countries, will also suffer. So this is something very important we'll be talking about. Obviously, when it comes to India, the Americans have let them do the trade with the Russians, whether it's about the import of wheat or oil or perhaps other important goods that they do, even the military hardware. And that transaction most likely is going to take place between ruble and Indian rupee. But Indian rupee was a lot of, it had a lot of pressure on it from the US dollar, hovering around 80 Indian rupees for a single dollar. So even the yen has also weakened against, so the case is with euro. So you can well imagine who is winning and who is gaining here. But to talk about it, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Air Vice Marshal Ikramullah Bhatti Saab, who's a senior analyst. Sir. Pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you very much for your presence, sir. And from Rome, we'll be having Jauhar Saleem Saab, who's the Excellency Ambassador to Italy from Pakistan. Sir, thank you very much, Excellency, for your time as well. And from Moscow, Russia, we'll be talking to Mr. Dr. Andrey Kortunov. He is the Director General of Russian International Affairs Council, and he's going to join us on telephone from Moscow, Russia. Now, let me put the first question to you, sir. This war, which we all thought will be over in a matter of weeks, perhaps even less than that, it's still lingering on, sir. No matter the kind of firepower the Russians have, it's not working out that well. When you talk about casualties and the kind of damage the Russians have suffered, sir, or they have gone through, that's enormous. As far as the financial aspect is concerned, sir, the global analysts believe that we are heading towards an extreme recession. We have had almost 44, 45 recessions in America ever since they came into being. But after every 6 to 7 years, there is a recession. Last one was in 2008. And again, after almost 14 years, we are talking about another one approaching, and approaching fast. You talk about the Russian engagement in Ukraine, sir. Obviously, they have their own strategic interest. They were pulled into this war, and finally, it has started, sir. Everything is right in front of you, sir. If this war lingers on, let's suppose for another couple of months, sir, it is going to have a very negative global impact, especially on countries like Pakistan. What is your take?
Well, you're right. The world was affected by the COVID pandemic, and which is still not over, and that affected the world economy very, very adversely. And we've seen that aviation, shipping, and tourism, they were the three major areas which are very, very adversely affected. And there's several airlines and shipping companies which went under, and finally when the trade did start, we found that the freight alone had gone almost more than 10 times.
It's true.
Which added to, of course, economic adversity all over the world. And now with this war looming, which was expected to not last a few weeks, and now it's been almost 5 months that it is still raging, two things have happened. Firstly, of course, the global supply of food grain, as you mentioned, and secondly, the availability of energy, especially to Europe, has been seriously affected. And as far as food is concerned, as you indicated, mentioned in your introduction, about 25 to 30% of food supply to the world goes out from Ukraine and Russia. And there are 36 countries in the world who import 50% more of food grains from these two countries. And of course, they are going to be very seriously affected, and if not, they are already affected. And similarly, when it comes to energy, we find that Europe used to import more than 40% of their oil and gas from Russia. And now they are forced to import it from the US in the shape of LNG, which is in much lesser quantity and at a much higher price. So that is why we find that in Germany today, 1 unit of electricity costs nearly 40 cents, which is the highest ever price of electricity in Germany. So the world is facing the impact of the war, and the economic consequences are visible, and they're going to continue much after the war is over, which is not visible right now, the end of the war. And as regards its economic effect on Russia and the rest of the world, I think Russians have so far not suffered very heavily as was anticipated by the West, because as you mentioned, the ruble has appreciated.
Yes.
And their trade surplus has almost doubled as of last year. So, and whatever energy that they were exporting to Europe is now being sent to China and India. So, Russia, as far as their trade and economy is concerned, they're still in a healthy position and they can continue to fight. However, they have not been able to make military or territorial gains within Ukraine or bring Ukraine to terms which they wanted in the time that they had planned. That of course is a dilemma that they are facing, possibly because they did not want to go full bore against the Ukrainians, because after all they are neighbors and they were together once, and again they have to live together, and they would not like to decimate Ukraine altogether. So they were restraining themselves, and probably that could be the reason that they have not been able to achieve the results.
So Avim Sahab, all the dialogues failed, everything failed, and the war started. And especially at that time when our former Prime Minister, Mr. Hannan, was there in Russia, and he was having a meeting with the President, which a lot of people believe went on for quite some time. Now, interestingly, sir, when you talk about India for that matter, the Americans have led them and allowed them to trade with the Russians, whether it's about oil or wheat or even the military hardware. and they have their own terms and conditions. If you remember looking at this interview of Mr. Jaishankar about a month ago, he was very categorical, he was very straight, and he meant business, that this is what India can do, this is what India will do, this is what we are supposed to do. So he was very straight about, number one, the foreign policy, number two, that we will not take any dictation, sir. So, and obviously they are the, I think they are the only country who are the strategic partners of the Russians and the Americans. And interestingly, these two countries, when we talk about Russia and America, they are the worst adversaries at the moment. So I think hats off to them in so many ways.
Well, you see, the Americans have already enacted a law called CATSA, Counting America's Adversaries through Sanctions Act. Now, when it comes to India, that is not applicable. And the Indians are allowed to do whatever they want to vis-a-vis trade or business with the Russians. Whereas elsewhere, they are ready to impose sanctions on Turkey, which is their NATO ally. So, whatever it goes on to say is, or it reaffirms that in international relations there is no ethics, there is no morality, it is just national interests. So, when it comes to India, of course, it's America's interest to let India have its way.
Obviously, China is there. Who else is going to?
And India knows this, so that is how they're going ahead boldly and having their way. And they're freely trading with Russia. They're importing cheap oil, cheap wheat, and even Russian weaponry. And the Americans have allowed them.
And that's what I'm saying now. That both these countries, and interestingly, forget about Russia and America for a moment. Even with China, they are hitting around 100 billion plus bilateral trade. So $100 billion, that's a lot of money.
Absolutely.
So I mean, their wise wisdom prevails, and that's the way.
That's the way.
So let me also engage now, Jauhar Saleem Saab. Jauhar Saleem Saab, since you are stationed in Turkey, in Italy, and you're keeping an eye on what's going on in Europe, sir. Let's enlighten us. Tell us what's exactly going on, sir, as far as any diplomatic effort is concerned to make sure that this war comes to an end, or some sort of negotiation that might take place in the future, and especially once the American President, Mr. Joe Biden, has visited Israel as well as Saudi Arabia. So do you think that is going to make any difference?
Well, Europe has been one of the most affected regions because of this war. The war is taking place in Europe, as you know. But in terms of the economic impact, it has been devastating as well. The energy prices, and Europe is very energy dependent. It imports like 90% of its gas, and its 46%, and 27% of its oil. So what has happened is the high energy prices, because of this conflict, have deeply impacted European economies. And of course, the security repercussions of this war were of utmost concern for them again. So that is why they have been at the forefront of the endeavors for coming up with some sort of a resolution of this crisis, of this conflict. There were many initiatives which were taken. France took an initiative, Italy took an initiative on its own. These leaders, they met President Putin, they met President Zelensky, but all these initiatives have not been successful. And for now, I think European leaders, they understand that there's not going to be a quick end to this conflict, and they have to live with this conflict for some time. And that is why they're now trying to neutralize, or at least trying to come up with measures which could lessen the economic impact of this crisis for their countries, for their economies, and for their people. And I, in Italy, see that happening. I see the impact of this conflict in terms of the energy prices, the prices on the gas stations, the prices in terms of your energy bills, your utility bills. And the increase has been tremendous. And that has deeply impacted the buying power of the Italian public. And I think many other European countries are facing the same.
Now, another important factor, sir, let's talk about the impact of this war on Asia. Now, especially when we talk about those countries who are oil reliant, like Pakistan, we are oil importing country, we are a wheat importing country, we are a coal importing country, we are an LNG importing country, energy importing, perhaps, let me put it this way. Now, sir, if you look at the prices of today, let's talk about the gas prices, sir. They have gone up 10 times, 10 times. I'm talking about the LNG. When it comes to coal, again, sir, we heavily depend on the coal as far as electricity is concerned. They have gone up 5 times as compared to the last year. Now, in LNG, sir, there is a huge shortage in Pakistan. You talk about the petroleum products, and due to the IMF, we have to, and rather we already had, increased the petroleum products prices, and very significant. I mean, this is the first time that I have at least witnessed that within a matter of hardly a few weeks, the prices in fact were increased by 100 and 130 in the case of on top of what the previous price was when it comes to diesel. Now, sir, that is very, very alarming, especially when our talking about the current account deficit that is well under 48 but well over $45 billion. Look at the condition currently, what's going on in Pakistan, political uncertainty as well. So today the dollar crossed 222 in the intrabank and 225 rupees for a dollar in the open market. So our stock market went down about 700 points yesterday, and today again around 1,000. So uncertainty, political uncertainty from within, and these macro environmental factors, which we cannot control because of the war and other factors put together. Let's talk about the challenges which we will face in the future, sir.
Definitely. In fact, this conflict has had a transformative effect, a transformative impact upon the global economy, first of all. Now, I was just mentioning about Europe because of its energy dependence on Russia and in general on the countries outside Europe. But coming to the developing countries, they have been hit the hardest. First of all, they have been priced out because you see Europeans and the rich countries, even if the energy prices and the food prices and the other prices go up, they still have the wherewithal to purchase what they require. But for the developing countries, it's a double jeopardy because their buying power has eroded. First of all, it's not just shortages, but it's also the erosion of their buying power. Then again, what has happened is there's a triple crisis for them. In fact, there's a triple jeopardy. First of all, it was the COVID pandemic, which impacted their economies. Then we are facing a climate crisis as well, the drought conditions in many countries, the very, very high temperatures in many, many countries. And on top of that, we have this conflict in Ukraine. So that there are at least 96 countries in the world, in the developing world, which have been impacted by one of these three factors. And there are more than half of these countries are in fact the countries which face a perfect storm because they have been impacted by all three of these factors. And I believe Pakistan is one of those countries. And we are seeing that in terms of the balance of payment challenge. Just to give you some statistics, the developing economies, the developing countries, particularly the low income developing countries, they face debt payments of $311 billion just for 2022. And that really creates a huge burden for the developing countries at a time when their buying power has eroded, when the import bills have really ballooned, and on the other hand, their exports in certain categories are fetching less prices. So this perfect storm, it is creating balance of payment crisis for many, many countries. There are at least 60 countries which are presently, these are low-income countries, which are presently either facing a balance of payment crisis or they are at a serious risk of one. And once you have a balance of prices, then the currency crisis is the next stage for that. As you've mentioned, the currencies start falling inordinately, and which further erodes your purchasing power, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. So it's a very difficult situation indeed. It's a very challenging situation indeed for developing countries and for countries like Pakistan in particular, which is very much dependent upon import of energy, import of certain food items, and of course it's an agrarian country, which is very much impacted by the climatic changes as well.
All right, sir. All right. Now, so we've also been joined in by Dr. Andrey Kortunov, Director General of Russian Intelligence, Russian International Affairs Council. Mr. Andrey, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Now, sir, talking about the Ukrainian war and the impact of this war on the globe, obviously food security has become a major issue. The world seems to be getting into a recession. Oil prices going up, coal prices, you talk about LNG prices, almost like 5 times the coal prices have gone up as compared to the last year, 10 times the LNG price. So the impact is well felt, and especially it is believed that the third world countries or the developing countries will suffer the most, especially those countries who import oil and food, just like Pakistan for that matter. Do you see this particular war coming to an end soon, or you believe that the Americans and the West will engage the Russians as long as they wish to? And negotiations currently, they don't seem to be a possible solution. Your take?
Well, it's very hard to predict. A lot will depend on the situation on the ground. But it's clear that the West and that the United States in particular does not incentivize Ukraine to engage into a new round of negotiations with Moscow. I think that the perception on the Western side is that with time, the negotiating positions of Ukraine might get better. Ukraine will get more supplies from the West in terms of the military hardware, and they might even try to launch a counteroffensive. That's why I think the position of the West is that we should wait until we see a change in the military situation. And of course, it's no more question whether this change takes place or not.
Now, since if let's suppose negotiations, they are not an option, currently, sir, whenever we switch on the television, especially the Western media I'm talking about, listening to them, the impression is that the Russians are having a lot of confrontation from the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are being supplied with a lot of weapons, modern weapons, anti-aircraft guns, anti-aircraft missiles, this German as well as the British anti-tank missile system. And on top now, the Ukrainians also demanding that F-16s or perhaps F-18 Hornets or Rafale kind of planes should be given to them on ASAP basis. So that means that this war is not only going to remain to Ukraine, I guess. Russians, they have a plan, they had a plan, and definitely Vladimir Putin means business. No matter what, this is more of an ego issue as well. Otherwise, definitely it was an issue of the national interest of the Russians, and we all believe that the movement from the NATO side right in the backyard, and almost as Mr. Putin said that in my porch, they are almost there in my porch. So nobody would like that the enemy should be in the porch. Obviously, the idea is to push them back and keep them at a certain level. But it seems that the West, in particular the Americans, really want this war to linger on and keep on engaging the Russians in this particular mess, I would say, sir. Your take?
Well, I think you're right. What we see there is a case of proxy war, and the inflow of arms to Ukraine is growing. And apparently, the United States would like to see Russia bleed in white and suffer a major defeat on the battlefield. However, I think that the Western media might be somewhat opinionated. They want to exercise a clear biased approach to the conflict, arguing that Ukraine is likely to start a counteroffensive. But the hardware is not the only factor that determines the outcome of the fighting on the ground. And of course, it's also about training. It's about the mobilization. So far, Russia is advancing, maybe slow, but steadily. And I don't think that the situation is likely to change anytime soon. So, if I were to give advice to everybody engaged in this conflict, I would say that they should get back to the negotiating table without any further delay, because it's the only way to resolve the problem. And I don't think that the Ukrainian side should look for encouragement from the United States. It is not likely to get such an encouragement.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for your comments, sir. It was a pleasure having you in the show. Now, coming back to you, Avim, sir, now a couple of points here. Let's talk about India again, because that is where I really see that economic diplomacy has reached its peak. We were earlier talking about the engagement of the Indians with the Chinese, with the Americans, and with the Russians. Now, sir, when we talk about international currencies, nobody knew about yuan perhaps 2 decades ago, but now it has become an international currency. You can do trade, and whenever you talk about the top currencies, you would see Saudi Arabia's currency there, the Riyal or the Dirham of UAE, Euro, British Pound, American dollar. Now yuan and yen also. Yen was always there, but yuan. But sir, let's suppose if international trade starts taking place in Indian rupee. So that means that the world, not the world, but certain countries are actually perhaps recognizing that currency as an international currency, sir. So I think that is going to be a huge benefit for the Indian economy in the long run. And especially when you look at the trading partners. For example, Russia is one of their major trading partners. So imagine buying Su-400 either through barter trade or through rupees. So they have, anything of that sort, and there is no pressure by the Americans and them, because they want India to counter China also. They're happy. It's a win-win situation for them, sir. But it's not a win-win situation for Pakistan, sir. Your take?
Well, you see, India is in a position where it can leverage itself with these big countries, China, Russia, and America. And because all these three big countries have interests with India.
And by the way, sir, the news is that the global population has touched 8 billion. And China is no more the number one country as far as population is concerned. They are number 2, and number 1 is India, with over 55 crore middle class.
Well, with that being the point, we can see that why these big countries are interested in India, and they are willing to negotiate, they are willing to trade, they are willing to trade in the Indian currency, and that is how India is able to leverage its size, its position, its influence, and of course have other countries interested in it because of its, as you mentioned, a large middle class, buying power, and of course geographical position, and of course the strength of economy and its proximity to China, which the Americans are more than keen to contain. So hence India is very wisely and very cleverly leveraging its position and getting all the benefits that it can from this new development in the world, in which we find that the Americans are ready to contain China and ensure that its growth, both economic and military, is contained, and they do not rise up to challenge the US sole superpower status. And India is willing to go along with them, and hence is getting dividends in the shape of various concessions from the Americans. And of course, lately we heard that of course they have the opportunity to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So although it's a long outstanding opportunity that they have, but it is there on the table, and it will only happen if the Americans support it, which they are more than willing. So the Indians are having a position which they are cleverly using and exploiting vis-a-vis all these three big countries.
And what are we up to?
Well, unfortunately, we have been hearing this term that we need to put our house in order, and this has
We
not
need to, in fact, define what exactly order means.
well.
We know about the house. What to do with it to put it in the right order, sir?
Well, of course,
That is something which
we are economically very weak, we are dependent and exploitable. We are politically very weak, again exploitable. So, I think if we are able to sort out our political issues, domestic political issues, our economy will be sorted out. I mean, we have all the potentials. I mean, take the case of power, for example, because we have a capacity to produce about 25,000 megawatts, and our requirement is 20, but we are actually producing just about 15 or maybe 14. And whereas we know that this country in the northern areas has a potential to produce.
Sir, we are still
over
talking about
100,000
energy.
megawatts
Sir, you
through
are
another
dependent on
projects.
LNG, and I was telling you about the process. I was talking about coal. We are dependent on coal. Hydel, I mean, this month of August is going to be the particular month in which they can produce the maximum hydel energy because they're already flooding. God knows what's going to happen in the coming days. Monsoon is right around. There was a pre-monsoon perhaps, and then you talk about the climate change issue, which is in direct conflict with the coal production for that matter. I mean, we are taking decisions on very ad hoc basis. And interestingly, sir, when you talk about the energy demand in Europe, that is skyrocketing, and the kind of purchasing power they have, we can't even think about it. So whoever pays more will fetch the bucket. Simple as that.
True. Unfortunately, we have not been able to exploit our resources, our capacities, our capabilities, and not been able to sort out our own problems. I mean, take the case of energy. If we focus on renewable energy, and we have enough capacity to produce at least 5 times than what we need today.
Sir, somebody shared a photo of one of the newspaper, and that was Jung, let me take the name, of 1972. That was the year when I was born, 50 years ago. And you know what was the headline? Hum Chini choron ke khilaf munasib karwai karenge, or something of that sort. What I'm saying is that's about people who are into this business of sugar, for that matter, sir. They were there, and after 50 years they are still there. We even couldn't manage that, so how can we talk about putting our own house in a proper order? So let me take the same point to our dear friend, Excellency Jauhar Saleem Saab. So now when we talk about the kind of image building that most of our neighboring countries have done, sir, and they have done brilliantly well also. When it comes to Pakistan, sir, we haven't been able to do anything so far. Honestly speaking, you go to America, even in the Bay Area, and you talk to educated Americans, they hardly would know about Pakistan. They would still think, well, it's somewhere around Middle East. And perhaps if you look like a Middle Eastern like myself, they would say, are you from Iraq? So this is the kind of impression they have. But having said that, sir, out here in Pakistan, people are so educated. We know so much about Americans that the Americans do not even know about themselves. What I'm saying is that it's a brand imaging of Pakistan, and showing the positive aspects, because yes, rapes do take place here, and the same is the case with all over the world, especially in America. But they do not become the headlines there. You talk about anything else for that matter where you can malign Pakistan, and perhaps through all these fake news agencies and otherwise, Indians have been trying to malign and set us off track in so many ways. They can practically ask China to make sure that Pakistan should not attend the summit of BRICS that was being hosted by the Chinese. Again, you talk about so many other aspects. This money laundering issue, we always used to talk about FATF issue. Whatever we have done, we are still in the grey list at the moment, sir. Again, the Indian pressure. So globally, sir, if you have an adversary which is picking up so well, and being a member or being present in G7 or G8 summits and all, that means something, sir, which deserves us, I guess, because we are lacking behind in so many areas.
Yeah, country brands, as you've rightly said, I think they're very important in this day and age. These days, economic development is very much about being part of the global economy in a very wholesome manner. Because you need what? You need the technology, you need trade, you need tourism, you need people interacting, because there's a lot of mobility in terms of workforce these days. So for all these things, country brands become crucial. India has had a huge advantage because of Bollywood, first of all, then some very, very influential NRIs that they have in the world. Even the US Vice President is an Indian origin lady. We might have a British Prime Minister who would be Indian origin. And there's so many influential Indian NRIs abroad. And in fact, they are the ones who convince.
And you never know, you might up having a UK Prime Minister who is an Indian.
Yeah, I said the possibility, and you see so many companies, CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world, they are Indians or Indian origin presently, and they have been very, very instrumental in convincing those companies to invest in India, and the whole tech sector in India has been dependent on that. Then again, in political terms, it's very beneficial, this country brand, but more so in the economic arena, because there it becomes vital. Unfortunately, if we compare with India, so we have not been that lucky. We don't have any Bollywood. We don't really have, we have a big diaspora abroad, but they're not really at that stage where the Indians are. Then again, there's some Indian companies which have become global players, companies like Reliance, for example, Infosys, Wipro. We don't have those type of companies. So that is why they have been very successful in terms of building an image or a brand, and we haven't. And that has hurt us in trade in terms of FDI. Just to give you an example, before 1991, Pakistan actually used to get more FDI than India. And look where we are today. We don't even get just a very small fraction, just a few percentage points of the FDI that they get.
Resource and, practically investing in the human capital.
Exactly. And, what they've done in terms of, outsourcing of tech industry in India, in cities like Hyderabad, which is now being called Cyberabad, and Bangalore, you have all those big American companies which are employing people, almost at the American salaries, which is just astounding in terms of the economic impact on India. So that is some, IT, for example, is a sector, if they become a mega player, and their IT exports is many times more than our total export. So I think it's very important that we start developing a brand as well. We really need to invest on that. We have so much in terms of natural resources. We have a beautiful, beautiful country. Our people are very exceptionally talented. Pakistanis, when they're abroad in Europe or America, they show their prowess in all spheres of life, all walks of life. But we haven't really been able to kind of, put it all together, so to speak. And I think that's very, very important. We really have to focus on that, because in the world today, if you don't have a suitable country brand, then you cannot interact, you cannot connect to the global economy in the most desirable way. And without that, quite frankly, you cannot have economic growth or economic development these days. These are not the times of import substitution type of philosophies. These days, the economic growth is based on either an export platform strategy or building your technology. And tourism, for example. Tourism is such a huge industry. For many, even for countries like Turkey, it earns tens of billions of dollars a year. And for Pakistan, it doesn't earn anything at all, although our potential is huge. In the same way, we have millions of IT workers. But these workers, they're not contributing as much to the economy as they can, because we are not integrated with the world economy to the same extent. A lot of these big tech companies, a lot of the other companies in the world they have not been investing in Pakistan in terms of FDI. And FDI, remember, FDI does not just bring money; it brings a lot of technology. It brings know-how. So it's a way, you see, because development is a holistic process, and if you have to be part of that process, then you have to be part of all those components which are so important. Some of which I've mentioned, and that is why you see, why do we face these balance of payment crisis time and again? Why so far we had to, I think 23 times we've had to go to IMF for bailout packages. Why? The last time India went to IMF was 1991 when they had a big crash and a big balance of payment crisis. But ever since they have learned their lessons, and they didn't have to recourse to that. But we're still doing that.
It's a trap. I still remember our former Prime Minister, who was also the Finance Minister, Shaukat Aziz Saab, saying that, humne IMF ka kashkol tod diya. That means, if you're taking that kashkol everywhere, that's not something decent to do. Because you keep on asking, sometimes we're asking the friendly countries. I mean, for how long will we keep on doing that? There should be an end to it. And obviously, I think this should be the final and foremost, issue that we are going through, the economic crisis. Ever since that I was born, and I've been reading and hearing about this, hum nazuk daur se guzar rahe hain. It's been 50 years as long as I remember, and we are still passing through that nazuk daur. God knows when that nazuk daur is going to finish, because it needs a lot of collective effort. Keep our own selfish interest, I would say, aside, and let's work for Pakistan. But anyway, sir, thank you very much for your presence, sir. It was a pleasure having you in our show, and thank you very much, AVM Saab. It was always a pleasure for us to host you in our program as well, sir. And that's all we have for this hour. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow, 8:05 p.m. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.